So the next phylum is Arthropoda, and I'm going to go over a few of the major characteristics, and this is going to make up the rest of the taxa that we're going to focus on. So arthropods have jointed appendages. So you can see here, this is like a crayfish leg, this is a grasshopper leg. They're all arthropods. They have these joints in their appendages. They have an exoskeleton made out of chitin. They have a segmented body, so you can see the segments here. These are some of the subphyla of arthropods. So you're going to be familiar with all of these. There's arachnids, crustaceans, insects, millipedes, which is the class Diplopoda, and centipedes, the class Chilopoda. Not my favorite. Luckily in the water, I don't have to deal with centipedes, Chilopoda. We're going to be focusing on these three because they actually interact with fresh water. These guys are mostly terrestrial. So arachnids is the first subphyla, and these are water mites. They're in Hydrocarina. They're usually really small, so if you see a little colorful dot moving around in the water, it's probably a water mite, so Hydrocarina. Relative to their appendages, their body's really big. They have 8 legs because they're an arachnid, just like spiders. A lot of times they're red or blue, and they're pretty bright colored. There's about 1,500 species in North America. I can't tell what they are beyond water mite, and I'd say a lot of people are probably in the same camp. But they're found in all kinds of freshwater habitats. So we're not going to learn anything more about them, but if you can tell me it's a water mite, then you're good to go. Next up, we have spiders. The subphyla arachnid. We won't go over anything else about them. Some go underwater. You can see here, and are considered semi-aquatic. So you can see this is like a fishing spider. See, here's one that's caught a fish. We're not going to go over these. I just wanted to let you know that they exist, and that when you're sampling aquatic habitats, you might find spiders that walk across the water like this, and they'll grab tadpoles and other things, but they don't usually live in the water. They usually live on the water. This guy's kind of an exception. So moving on, these are crustaceans. This is the order Isopoda. And the family is Acelidae. They have 7 pairs of legs. The first pair have claws, and their body is flattened top to bottom. And that's the part you need to remember, because there's another thing that looks similar that's flattened from side to side. So this is an isopod, kind of like a roly-poly. It's flattened top to bottom. They're usually fairly small, 5 to 20 millimeters. There's 130 species in North America, and they live in a bunch of different kinds of habitats. So you can find them in ponds or streams. But the thing you need to remember is that they're flattened top to bottom, and they're isopods. These guys are the other ones. They're also crustaceans. These are amphipods. They're flattened from side to side, so you can see they're squished. So these are the ones. Isopods and amphipods are the two you're going to get confused. They both have 7 pairs of legs, first 2 pairs with claws. That's the main distinguishing feature. They're about the same size as the isopods. There are 3 families and 150 species in North America. These guys also live in a variety of habitats. You can find them in streams or ponds. And we're not going to do families. They're pretty hard to identify. So if you can tell me it's an amphipod, then you'll be doing pretty good. Next up, you probably are going to be able to recognize these guys with no problem. Crayfish and shrimp are in the order Decapoda, also crustaceans, which you probably all knew already. Decapoda means 10 legs, so they have 10 legs. They're much bigger than most other things we're talking about, so 25 to 150 millimeters. They have a cylindrical body shape, and there are 334 species in North America, and almost all of them are crayfish. Where we are, we only have one family, the family Cambaridae. There are freshwater shrimp in some places, but they're pretty rare. I rarely come across them. So we're not going to worry about them, but they're also decapods. So we're just going to be focusing on these guys. So Decapoda, crayfish, Cambaridae is the family. I did want to point out that we are the crayfish diversity hotspot for the whole world. So you can see this is the number of species, the darker blue. And you can see there's a ton of species of crayfish where we live. There's a ton. That Tennessee, southern Kentucky area is like a freshwater diversity hotspot for a lot of groups. But crayfish, there's a hotspot of biodiversity just north of us. There's a ton in the Ozarks. And there's a lot of these kind of specialized cave crayfish that live in the water in caves. And there's a lot of cool crayfish that live in streams too. Obviously, we have a lot of crayfish here in Louisiana. There's one species that we eat more than most of the other ones. And we even have terrestrial crayfish around here. So we have a lot of crayfish. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is move on to the class Insecta. And this is going to make up the rest of the things you need to know. And in this class, most of the things you're going to need to know are aquatic insects. So insects, we said they're arthropods. What makes them different from other kinds of arthropods is that they're the only class with wings. Now, not every insect has wings, so we'll talk about that. And we're going to be focused on the aquatic life stages, and a lot of those don't have wings because you don't need to fly underwater. So they have one pair of antennae, and they have 3 body parts. This is probably something you guys all knew already from probably elementary school. So they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And for anybody that has taken Dr. Clay's entomology class, you're going to have a leg up on everybody else. But Dr. Clay focuses usually on the adults. In the aquatic environment, a lot of times we're going to be focused on larvae. Not for everything, but for a lot of things. So, for insects, you're only going to need to know the aquatic form. So in some orders, all the life stages are aquatic, so you're going to need to know both. But you may not need to know as much detail for one order or the other, and I'll tell you everything about that. In some insect orders, though, only one life stage is aquatic, and that's the only one I'm going to expect you to know. Because basically, I want you to know if you put a net in a stream and pull up some organisms, I want you to know what they are. If it's flying around in the air, it's not as important for freshwater ecology. Obviously, it's important because they're different life stages of the same organisms, but for the purposes of this class, we're just going to focus on the things that actually live in the water, underwater, for the most part. So when we talk about insects, we have to talk about metamorphosis. It's what people think of as a defining characteristic of insects, but interestingly, not all insects have metamorphosis. There are several different life cycles, and again, anybody that's taken entomology is going to know these words. So we've broken it up into 4 different groups based on their metamorphosis. So we have ametabolous insects, which have no metamorphosis at all. Then we have hemimetabolous and parametabolous, which are kind of in between. And then holometabolous is probably what you think of when you think of butterflies and moths, which have a complete metamorphosis, which means they have a larval form, a pupal form, like the cocoons or chrysalises of moths and butterflies, and then an adult life stage. So that's holometabolous. Hemimetabolous and parametabolous are kind of in between. And which life cycle determines the number of life stages, what they look like when you sample the aquatic ecosystems.